This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Lo Kwei Su. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Dozens injured in China after a car plows into children and pedestrians outside a primary school. It's the third mass casualty incident in the country in just over a week. Hong Kong's largest national security trial ends with jail terms for 45 anti-government activists charged with conspiracy to commit subversion. The U.S. puts its weight behind its ally, the Philippines, in the South China Sea, saying a pact on mutual defense applies to any armed attack in disputed waters. The IMF warns tit-for-tat tariffs could undermine Asia's economic growth amid concerns over Donald Trump's plans to impose levies on all U.S. imports. And also tonight, how China intends to realize its grand plan of building the first human colony on the moon. Several children and pedestrians are injured after a car crash outside a primary school in central China's Hunan province. State broadcaster CCTV says the specific number of casualties is still under investigation, and the cause remains unclear. And for more, CNA's Deborah Wong joins us live from Hong Kong. Deborah, of course, a lot of this is still under investigation. What more might we know about this incident so far?
So far, we know that police have arrested a 39-year-old male, although it did not explain how and why the incident happened. It just said that investigations are ongoing. Now, you've heard earlier from CCTV that several students were hurt, but none of them are in life-threatening situations. And authorities also have not released any official figures as to the number of people who have been injured. But what we're hearing from CCTV is that the driver is not a student nor a parent at the school. And we've gotten information from videos circulating on Chinese social media. We're seeing, a scene of chaos, students on the ground, notebooks and bags strewn everywhere. People are screaming. And there was also another video of a man who appears to be a suspect. He looked like he was beaten by passers-by, and he was shortly restrained after that and also taken away. And residents, of course, over social media are expressing shock, not just at this incident, but at the spate of mass attacks that happened just in just these 2 weeks. They're talking about it's quite crazy that such mass attacks are happening in China. We're seeing comments questioning public safety, questioning why the perpetrators have gone to such extremes. They've also questioned the state of discontent in some quarters of society that's led to this incident. So what we're seeing is a heightened state of anxiety in China right now. But at the same time, communities are also coming together. They're rallying. We did see people commenting, asking what they can do to help. Just like in the case of another car attack in Zhuhai last week, where 35 people died and 43 people were injured. Eventually, in the days that followed, we did see a lot of people queuing up at blood banks to try to donate blood to help those who are critically injured.
Deborah, of course, you're seeing signs of all this anxiety, certainly on social media amongst Chinese netizens. Social stability always a concern for authorities. What have they been doing to react to this concern from Chinese netizens?
So on a national level, we saw both President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang made comments last week when the Zhuhai incident happened. They called for local governments to do more to support social conflicts on all levels to prevent them from escalating to extreme situations like what we saw in Zhuhai and what we're seeing today in Hunan as well. So these attacks are happening amid, a major economic slowdown in China. So authorities recognize that, and they're looking to address societal distress. And today, China's top prosecutors actually met to discuss the sentencing for major vicious and extreme crimes, as well as those that endanger public security. In fact, China's Procurator General said in a post on Weibo that the hand of strictness can never be loosened, and that authorities should be resolute in punishing such crimes to provide a strong deterrent. And what we're also seeing on Chinese news sites is that they've started to broadcast public safety announcements. We're seeing infographics, advising people on what to do if they encounter mass public attacks, such as is a driver driving erratically, is the car swaying from side to side at high speeds, what to do if you do encounter such attacks, where to hide in case of shooting or stabbing attacks. The fact that such announcements are being made in China at the moment, where mass attacks have up to recently been quite rare, is concerning because it does show a hypervigilance across all segments of society. Back to you.
Well, thanks. CNA's Deborah Wong speaking to us there from Hong Kong. We stay in Hong Kong, where a court has sentenced 45 activists to prison in the city's largest national security trial. The activists were jailed for 4 to 10 years. No one received the maximum sentence of life imprisonment, which is permitted under the national security law imposed in 2020. CNA's Mei Wong tells us more.
Inside this Hong Kong court earlier, the 3 judges appointed to oversee this case took less than 30 minutes before adjourning the session. They did not read out the reasons behind the sentencing, as they said it was 82 pages long. But they did mention that the sentencing has to reflect the exact criminality and its consequences. The 45 defendants, including students, academics and ex-politicians, were arrested in 2021 for holding an unofficial primary to select opposition members to contest in local elections. Authorities say the actions of the activists were aimed at undermining the Hong Kong administration and to force the city's chief executive to resign in the 2020 legislature elections. Following Tuesday's sentencing, the 45 will still remain in jail. They have been behind bars for almost 4 years since the arrests.
對於今次個判決咧，咁其實我自己個人覺得啦，比想象中係冇咁差嘅。但係你話會唔會開心咧？咁心裏面係絕對唔會開心嘅，係啦。咁當然即係可能見到啲朋友可能即將喺有一個時間係見到終於有機會出嚟啦。咁當然喺心裏邊有少少欣慰嘅，因為都好想佢哋可以同屋企人老婆仔女快啲團聚啦。尤其是我自己個朋友啦，張可心啦。
我覺得2021年到而家，覺得好似係上演咗一場大戲咁。今日佢雖然係判咗刑啦，但係呢場戲其實未落幕㗎咯。
Witnessing Tuesday's court session include diplomatic representatives from Western nations. Countries like the US and the UK have previously criticized the prosecution of the activists and demanded for their release. Hong Kong authorities, however, counted that the use of the national security law is within their judicial right and that the law is necessary to ensure stability in the city.
今次嘅判刑呢，我哋認為係已經反映咗呢個罪行嘅嚴重性。亦都顯示咗咧危害國家安全嘅罪行係必須要予以嚴懲。有關嘅重判呢，係向社會清楚表達咗一個訊息，就係對於任何危害國家安全，包括係顛覆國家政權嘅行為咧，我哋係絕不會姑息嘅。我哋就住個別嘅刑期，會係詳細研究判詞，再考慮咧係是否作出上訴。
This largest conviction and sentencing of 45 activists may have come to an end, but another high-profile case under this same law will be set to resume on Wednesday involving media tycoon Jimmy Lai, and he's expected to take the stand as he faces charges of collusion with foreign forces and sedition. He faces a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. Mei Wong, CNA, Hong Kong.
China says it supports Hong Kong's actions, noting that no one should be able to engage in illegal activity under the guise of democracy and escape legal punishment.
中国中央政府坚定支持香港特区维护国家安全，依法惩治各类危害国家安全的行动、危害国家安全的活动，坚决反对个别西方国家借有关司法个案干涉中国内政、抹黑和破坏香港法治。
And Western nations have criticized the sentencing. A spokesperson for the U.S. consulate in Hong Kong says Washington, quote, strongly condemns the move, adding the defendants were aggressively prosecuted and jailed for normal political activity, protected under Hong Kong's basic law. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong says the government is gravely concerned about the sentencing, which includes Australian citizen Gordon Ng. She's called for China to cease what she describes as the suppression of freedoms of expression, assembly, media and civil society. Taiwan's presidential office also condemning this jailing. It's pledged to stand in solidarity with Hong Kong, urging the international pro-democracy camp to pay attention to the situation in Hong Kong. Our critics say the sentencing tarnishes Hong Kong's role as a global financial hub. The events are taking place as the city holds an international financial summit. Rights groups around the world have slammed the jailing as evidence of the erosion of political freedoms in Hong Kong, or since Beijing imposed a security law in 2020. The U.S. sees China's behavior in the South China Sea as concerning. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin relayed much in his ongoing visit to the Philippines. He's accusing China of stepping up aggression in denying Manila access to some areas. Mr. Austin also reinforced America's long-standing commitment to Manila, saying the mutual defense treaty applies to any armed attack in contested waters. The Philippines is one of Washington's oldest Asian allies. It is, in fact, Washington's oldest Asian ally.
I won't speculate on what the next administration will do. What I can tell you is what I know. And what I know is that I've seen strong support for the Philippines in both parties in the United States.
Today, Mr. Austin was at a military camp in Palawan, where he met with officials responsible for patrolling the Western Island province. It's a key location for ongoing naval operations in the contested South China Sea. And for more, CNA's Buena Bernal joins us live from Metro Manila. Buena, Mr. Austin repeating that the defense treaty with Manila is ironclad and Washington will stand firm. Can we read that as more financial or military support from Washington for the Philippines?
Outgoing U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin III, as well as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, made an unprecedented level of defense spending commitment to the Philippines last July at $500 million, and at that time promising that this commitment has bipartisan support and therefore can be delivered despite an incoming leadership transition in the Western superpower. Now, in that Tuesday afternoon local time press conference, Mr. Austin also announced an additional $100 million humanitarian assistance for the Philippines typhoon response. He also demonstrated the use of an unmanned surface vessel that Washington provided to its oldest ally in the Indo-Pacific. And that is one of many unmanned capabilities that Washington is providing to the Philippines as part of security assistance. This particular vessel has the potential to be used by the Philippines in its resupply missions of its outposts in the West Philippine Sea, which is how the Philippines calls its maritime zone in the larger South China Sea. Mr. Austin also set foot on an air base that is part of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement between these two countries. This is a deal that allows the United States access to Philippine bases through the construction and joint use of facilities funded by the Western superpower. Mr. Austin also addressed the press along with his Philippine counterpart, Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr. from the Western Command. This is the command within the Armed Forces of the Philippines that is in charge of patrolling the waters adjacent to that western Philippine island of Palawan, and that covers the Spratly Islands claimed entirely by China in its 10-line claim that was invalidated by a 2016 arbitral tribunal ruling for being violative of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Northeast part of the Spratly Islands, the Philippines calls its Kalayaan or Freedom Municipality. Now, while this military assistance is there, of course, critics are saying that the assistance should go beyond the military sphere and should expand to the economic sphere as well, pointing out that despite this long-time alliance in the military sphere, the Philippines does not have a free trade agreement with the United States.
Berna, meanwhile, China said any kind of military agreement that is signed should not target a third party or escalate tensions. How does the Philippines intend to balance its ties with Washington while also not aggravating China?
You have to understand that the defense establishment and Philippine military is really highly pro-United States because, again, of that long-standing military alliance that involves hundreds of joint drills each year, the flagship of which is called Balikatan, or shoulder to shoulder, that will simulate a real battle by 2025. And there's also that long-standing relationship in that American soldiers and Filipino soldiers fought alongside each other in Vietnam War, Korean War, World War II. But despite that, there are also other tools in the arsenal of the Philippines, so to speak, in terms of engaging its partners in the region. There's trade, for example, China being one of the top export markets of the Philippines, although the Philippine economy is not exactly export-driven. There's also diplomacy, for example. There's a bilateral consultation mechanism on the South China Sea between the Philippines and China. And it is through these talks that these two countries are able to find common ground, no matter how slim, to ensure stability in the South China Sea. But Defense Secretary of the Philippines, Gilberto Doro Jr., still saying during that press conference that what made this alliance robust is really China's expansionism.
Well, thanks to Berna reporting live there from Metro Manila. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, China promises to help Hong Kong bring back its shine as a financial hub. And the International Monetary Fund warns of a lose-lose situation for economies around the world ahead of new tariffs promised by the Trump White House. Well, it's time for Business with Henry. And Henry, China looking to boost Hong Kong's competitiveness as an international financial hub.
Well, yeah, indeed, Wei Su. Actually, the moves can actually support the confidence in Hong Kong's stock market at least. And China's vice premier says the country will support more high-quality companies from China to list and issue bonds in Hong Kong. This comes at a time when the city's future as a financial center is facing scrutiny. Speaking at the Global Financial Leaders Investment Summit, Vice Premier He Lifeng says China's recent stimulus measures are gradually taking effect and benefiting Hong Kong's markets. He says Beijing will help support Chinese financial institutions to expand their businesses in Hong Kong. Companies often issue shares or bonds to raise financing for expansion plans or research. The Vice Premier says China also wants to make it a usual practice to issue government bonds in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong's standing as a regional capital market hub has diminished in the past few years, with the value of initial public offerings and second listings sliding. According to LSEG data, Hong Kong stock market saw a 16% on-year drop in funds raised for IPOs and follow-on share sales in the first 6 months of this year. And the deal's slowdown has prompted Western and Chinese financial firms to slash hundreds of investment banking jobs in the past 2 years. And some international law firms have scaled back or even exited their businesses in the Greater China region. Investors in Hong Kong are looking to the summit for more clues on further stimulus to shore up the broader Chinese economy. Well, the benchmark Hang Seng Index closed higher today as tech shares supported sentiment. And shares in the city have been battled by China's weak economic growth and ongoing property crisis among mainland developers. And mainland markets recouped their earlier losses and ended in positive territory, and with the Shenzhen Component Index finishing about 2% higher as tech shares rallied, while Shanghai Composite Index also eked out its first gain in 4 trading days. And Thomas Tor from BlackRock weighs in on Chinese equities and what they tell us about China's economic recovery so far.
It's certainly been an interesting time to be a China investor over the last 6 weeks. You know, what we've really seen since the end of September is a little bit of a comeback from foreign investors into the Chinese equity markets, but it does seem to be more tactical in nature. There was a little bit of a wait-and-see approach with regards to the National Party Congress and some of the numbers that investors were expecting to come out of that. In the last couple of weeks, we've actually been seeing a little bit of outflows from China ETFs as well, which is interesting. And I think, you know, the majority of investors, you know, see this as net positive. You know, clearly, some of the loan obligations and rollover and the debt that is being issued is a short-term boost for the equity markets, but over the longer term, it's not really being seen as a broad fix. You know, there's still three major issues with the Chinese economy. One is the demographic situation, one is the debt situation, and the other one is the deflationary situation. And so it does seem to remain a tactical trade for now from foreign investors. And a big question on whether onshore domestic consumers will start spending again, because that's really been the issue post-COVID. And that's one of the reasons we haven't seen very strong earnings growth from Chinese companies as of yet. So I think still quite early stages here.
The International Monetary Fund has warned that retaliatory tariffs could raise costs and undermine Asia's economic growth. The APAC director of IMF says tit-for-tat tariffs threaten to disrupt growth prospects across the region, leading to longer and less efficient supply chains. A bruising trade war is looming between the world's two largest economies. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has vowed to slap a 60% tariff on Chinese goods. These tariffs could hamper growth in China and other exporting nations and potentially raise inflation in the U.S. This could force the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates, despite a lackluster outlook for the global economy, and lead to knock-on effects on interest rates in Asia, global capital flows, and exchange rates. Beijing is already fighting a trade war with the EU after the bloc raised tariffs on China-made electric vehicles last month. South Korea's household debt grew the most in 3 years in the third quarter, and this has fueled worries that a rate cut could pump more liquidity to the red-hot property market and worsen the country's financial imbalance. Bank of Korea figures show that total household credit rose by nearly $13 billion in the July to September quarter to hit $1.37 trillion. And a major component of the credit is mortgage loans, which also rose by the most since the third quarter of 2021. The rise in private loans came as property prices in Seoul and its surrounding areas gained rapidly earlier this year. Although concerns have mounted on the impact of further rate cuts, South Korea's central bank began its policy pivot last month with a quarter-point cut to its benchmark interest rate. It's widely expected to hold it unchanged at 3.25% next week. But on the flip side, housing prices in the capital city have shown signs of stabilization. Apartment prices in Seoul slipped for the first time in 9 months in September. And that's all for Business. Wei Su, back to you.
Thank you, Henry. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, G20 leaders calling for comprehensive ceasefires in both Gaza and Lebanon after wrapping up their annual meeting. Dozens injured in China after a car plows into children and pedestrians outside a primary school in Hunan province. It's the third mass casualty incident in the country in just over a week. Hong Kong's largest national security trial ends with jail terms for 45 anti-government activists charged with conspiracy to commit subversion. The U.S. puts its weight behind its ally, the Philippines, in the South China Sea, saying a pact on mutual defense applies to any armed attack in disputed waters. A joint statement by G20 leaders indicates consensus on a range of issues, including the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. The leaders of the G20 are calling for comprehensive ceasefires in Gaza and Lebanon after concluding their meeting in Rio de Janeiro. But addressing global challenges such as poverty, hunger and climate change, these have been complicated by the prospect of an incoming Trump presidency. Kate Fisher reports from Rio.
Fighting poverty and hunger, the themes for the first day of this G20 meeting here in Rio, with Brazil's leader using his country's presidency to start a new initiative aimed at ensuring nobody goes hungry.
Compete aos que estão aqui, compete aos que estão de volta desta mesa, a inadiável tarefa de acabar com essa chaga que envergonha a humanidade. Por isso, colocamos como objetivo central da presidência brasileira no G20 o lançamento de uma aliança global contra a fome e a pobreza. Este será o nosso maior legado.
The alliance has widespread global support, but consensus has been harder to find elsewhere, like over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. US President Joe Biden used what's likely to be his last appearance at a global summit as US Commander-in-Chief to push countries to support Ukraine even more in their fight against Russia.
The United States strongly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Everyone around this table, in my view, should as well. And by the way, Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine led to the highest record food prices in all of history.
He also called on his fellow leaders to increase pressure on Hamas to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza.
We're going to keep pushing to accelerate a ceasefire deal that ensures Israel's security but brings hostages home and ends the suffering of the Palestinian people and children. I ask everyone here to increase the pressure on Hamas.
Well, negotiators at the COP29 climate conference in Azerbaijan have also been struggling to reach a deal, and those tensions over global warming have also been felt here in Rio, almost half a world away, with the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres calling on world leaders here to take the lead on this, trying to get them to break the stalemate, saying they hold the purse strings with 85% of the world's economy, and they are also responsible for 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. But hanging over all of this is the looming spectre of another Trump presidency. He's made it clear that he's skeptical of climate change. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement the last time he was in power and has suggested he's likely to do so again. That all makes things much harder for other countries to agree to sign up to pay to combat climate change when they're not sure if the world's biggest economy, the United States, is going to still be on board after January. Kate Fisher, CNA, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says fostering economic growth through open trade and investment is key to tackling global poverty. Mr. Wong was speaking at the G20 summit in Brazil, where he highlighted the importance of preparing workers for new job opportunities. He added that Singapore is happy to share its approach to developing the workforce. Geraldine Yap has more from Rio de Janeiro.
Attending his first G20 summit as Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong was warmly welcomed by Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva at the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro. While not a formal G20 member, Singapore has been consistently invited to participate in the summit, a reflection of its influence and active role in shaping global economic and policy discussions. During the first plenary session, Mr. Wong spoke about the importance of open trade and investments in tackling poverty. The Prime Minister acknowledged that the most direct way to fight hunger and poverty is to stop conflicts and wars and to provide assistance to conflict zones. And that is why Singapore is doing its part where possible, including through providing aid to the people in Gaza. But he says growth and trade remains one of the best ways to create jobs, which is the most direct way to reduce poverty. And that is why efforts to reform and strengthen the World Trade Organization are important. Mr. Wong adds that it's also key to ensure people are equipped with skills to take on new opportunities. That's why more will have to be done outside of schools to reskill and upskill adult workers and match them to new jobs that are being created. Mr. Wong says this has long been Singapore's approach and has helped the country keep its unemployment rate at less than 3% for a long time. The Prime Minister adds that Singapore is happy to share its experience and to support the World Bank's High-Level Advisory Council on Jobs, which Singapore President Tharman Shanmugaratnam co-chairs. He pledged that Singapore will continue to participate actively in G20 and other platforms to create a more just world and sustainable planet. Mr. Wong will be speaking again on Tuesday at a plenary session on sustainable development and energy transitions. Geraldine Yap, CNA, Rio de Janeiro.
PM Wong also took a moment to speak to Donald Trump on the telephone, during which he congratulated the US president-elect on winning the election. The Prime Minister highlighted the strong and dynamic partnership between the two countries in a Facebook post, noting that it is founded on mutual trust and shared interests. Mr. Wong also expressed his eagerness to collaborate with Mr. Trump and his team to further strengthen ties. In a quieter moment off the main stage, Mr. Wong caught up with some familiar faces closer to home, taking time to sit down with Malaysia's and Vietnam's prime ministers, as well as Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto. He remarked in a social media post that, quote, "The ASEAN spirit is strong no matter where they are." Donald Trump could learn in the coming hours if he has managed to avoid punishment for his criminal conviction. He's scheduled to be sentenced next week, but the judge could decide today to throw out the case. Legal scholars say this is uncharted territory for the judge, who now has the task of deciding the fate of the U.S. president-elect. Sally Patterson has more from New York.
The last time Donald Trump sat inside Manhattan criminal court, he became the first former U.S. president to be convicted of a crime.
This was, I believe, the greatest political movement.
Now he's America's president-elect, making things even more complicated. Back in May, he was found guilty on 34 felony charges. A lot's happened since then. He's been the subject of not one, but two assassination attempts. His successor bowed out of the presidential race, and Trump went on to win a sweeping election victory.
Mother Teresa could not beat these charges. These charges are rigged. The whole thing is rigged.
But the jury ruled Donald Trump was far from a saint. He paid $130,000 to porn star Stormy Daniels to keep quiet about a sexual encounter she claims the pair had back in 2006. None of that is illegal. What broke the law is how that money was filed. It was recorded as payments for legal services to his then lawyer, Michael Cohen. Prosecutors say Trump did that to suppress unflattering information from coming out ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Donald Trump said all along that the real verdict would come on Election Day. The criminal proceedings inside this courtroom did nothing to dampen the president-elect's popularity. If anything, they may have even bolstered it. The sentencing was delayed after the Supreme Court ruled in July that former presidents largely cannot be prosecuted based on their official acts in office. Trump's lawyers say the ruling means this case and the others he's battling across the country should be scrapped. That's because some of the evidence heard in the trial relates to incidents that happened while Trump was the president.
The prosecution is arguing that this case does not run afoul of the immunity decision, that giving hush money payments and lying about them is not within the core presidential powers.
Professor of law Cheryl Bader tells me Judge Juan Merchan has several options.
The criminal procedure law.
The judge could order a new trial excluding certain evidence, throw out the case completely, delay again, or proceed with the sentencing as planned.
You'll hear a lot that the judge could sentence him to up to 4 years in jail. I think any sentence of incarceration has always been unlikely, but certainly now that Trump is going to take the White House again, I think it's extremely unlikely.
What's also unlikely is the 3 other cases he's facing going ahead anytime soon. In 2 months, Donald Trump will take command of the most powerful government in the world. But his legal future, at least for now, remains out of his hands. Sally Patterson, CNA, New York.
And still on East Asia tonight.
Only 5% of the ocean has been explored and charted by humans. The rest, especially its depths, are still unknown.
We brought a state-of-the-art research ship that's on a mission to explore Earth's final frontier, the oceans. Singapore prides itself on being amongst the first countries in the world to approve the sale of cultivated meat, which it did back in 2020. It has since developed regulations for this industry that some other countries are seeking to emulate in a bid to improve food security and to help fight climate change. Claudia Lim tells us more.
It might look like a regular butcher, but a section here is dedicated to cultivated meat, or meat grown from cells. Huber's first started selling the meat in their restaurant before introducing it in stores some 6 months ago. So far, it's seen a growing interest from consumers.
There's people in the food space that are very curious to try this product. There is also the younger people which are willing to also give such technology a go. So I saw a vegetarian at my bistro trying it, and I was asking the person, you know, how is this chicken that you're trying, this cultivated chicken? And he said, honestly, I can't tell you because this is the first time in my life I'm eating meat. They told me he was a vegetarian and he's only trying it because they didn't kill an animal for this.
One not-for-profit think tank says more innovation is needed to further improve such foods and bring down costs. This will help consumer demand for such alternative proteins grow.
Many of the products that are out on the market right now do not hit taste parity nor nutrition parity, but do require a premium price. That is not a very attractive proposition for a consumer. We need government support in getting there because VCs, like venture capitalists, are not well positioned to fund this cycle of innovation. They need to see a 10x return within 5 years. That is not going to happen.
To help fill the gap, a new research centre for sustainable protein opened in the National University of Singapore in September. It also aims to lead the commercialisation of such products in the region. Good Food Institute says other countries are also looking to Singapore for regulatory advice. These include nations like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates that are looking to certify such cultivated meat as halal.
The Singapore brand is known for its quality, and that is the same with the Singapore halal certification mark. So it is known to be a trusted quality brand. And interestingly, for this particular space, MUIS is the first religious authority that has formally issued a fatwa on cultivated meat. And so that's the reason why other regulatory bodies are also religious regulatory bodies are looking at MUIS to understand a bit more how we come to that particular position.
Meantime, experts say more public support is needed for cultivated meat to go mainstream. For instance, introducing alternative proteins in schools and hospitals, or expanding the variety sold in supermarkets.
Seas and oceans are regarded by some as the world's greatest allies against climate change, given the role they play in absorbing carbon emissions. But as the Earth heats up, oceans are less able to function effectively. As CNA's Rani Samtani reports, one research ship is on a mission to find out how to protect this vital resource.
Every second breath that anyone takes comes from the oceans. It's the largest carbon sink for the world, and so the more that we can do to understand, protect, and conserve around the ocean space, then hopefully we'll have a long and bright future for our next generation.
This is the Ocean Explorer. The state-of-the-art vessel is 87 meters long and fitted with the most advanced equipment for deep-sea exploration. With submersibles and remote-operated vehicles, it is charting the ocean, the last unexplored frontier on Earth. It recently made unexpected discoveries in parts of Southeast Asia.
We've been sailing in Indonesia and Malaysia. We discovered a seamount that nobody knew had been there. Each mission, we're collecting terabytes and terabytes of data. The world's lungs are its forests and oceans. So 2/3 of the world is, bringing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. What we want is people to figure out why that's happening, how it's happening, and how we can preserve that.
Southeast Asia is an amazing location. It's the most biodiverse location in the world, the most biodiverse waters. It also is one of the locations that is getting most impacted from global climate change. We had a number of universities from Malaysia that did some of this coral studies and other sediment samples and other things in both Tioman and Kuantan. And what they found was actually the corals were rebounding much quicker than they thought, but they also discovered 5 new deep sea coral habitats that they previously didn't know about.
Only 5% of the ocean has been explored and charted by humans. The rest, especially its depths, are still unknown. The Ocean Explorer is equipped with cutting-edge technology like this submersible to help survey different marine environments and map the ocean floor. Recent expeditions across Southeast Asia have helped governments and researchers make key scientific findings to help combat climate change. Along with collecting data about what's at the bottom of the ocean, the ship has scientific labs on board to immediately analyze samples and species collected.
The scientists can effectively do the whole sort of life cycle of research in one place while they're at sea. So from sample collection to the further analysis to the gene sequencing, the whole lot. So that means that over the course of the mission, they can then take home all of that data and it's all ready for them to publish effectively. So for a lot of samples, for example, doing the environmental DNA work, we can get results in a matter of days, sort of 3 to 5 days. If you have to just collect the samples and then do further analysis on shore, it can take months and months and months.
With global temperatures hitting record highs, the focus on ocean-based action has been growing at the annual UN-led COP discussions.
The oceans is a shared resource, a shared investment to our well-being, and so it really takes cross-country dialogues and cross-border dialogues in order to have a better impact on the oceans and know how to better conserve, protect.
Scientists insist reaching net zero emissions is impossible without nature-based solutions. Earth's vast forests and oceans are the only option for absorbing carbon pollution on a large scale, which is why experts around the world say more needs to be done to protect them. Rani Samtani, CNA, Singapore.
And China is pouring billions of dollars into space research in a race to land astronauts on the moon by 2030. It's part of a growth strategy dubbed New Quality Productive Forces. CNA's award-winning documentary series, now that's When Titans Clash, finds out how China is working those productive forces in space.
China's ambition for its new quality productive forces extend beyond planet Earth. June 2024. A room of engineers anxiously monitor the landing of the Chang'e 6 lunar probe on the far side of the moon. Its aim is to collect samples from this rarely explored terrain. Mission accomplished.
到背面采样，这是世界的第一次。我们中国科学家如果最后能够拿到月被采回的月壤来做科学研究，这对我们是个很大的进步。
According to the Chinese government, lunar exploration is one aspect of new quality productive forces in outer space. China's long-term plan for the moon is something straight out of a sci-fi movie, and that is to be the first to establish a human colony on the moon.
习主席呢，他近期在鼓励中国航天事业发展上呢，曾经说这样的一句话，就是探索浩瀚宇宙，发展航天事业， 建设航天强国是我们这一代人不懈追求的航天梦。
The first steps of that plan have already materialized. Researchers have figured out a way of extracting water from soil on the moon.
基本上是有一个凹面镜或者是一个菲米利尔透镜的方法，将太阳光聚焦，可以加热月壤到1500度以上，把它融化掉，这样就会产生大量的水蒸气。我们把水蒸气收集起来之后，就可以做饮用水。
The Chinese scientists say their method allows them to extract 76 kilograms of water from around 1 ton of lunar soil. And water is just the beginning.
同时呢，这个水我们也可以电解，得到氧气和氢气。另外，氢气也是一种能源，我们可以把它燃烧或者做燃料电池发电。另外呢，我们加热的这个月壤它生成了铁，同时也有陶瓷玻璃。铁呢，我们可以做建筑材料，然后而建筑材料里面的陶瓷、钢铁也是必须的。所以这样我们就可以在月球上去做一些建筑。
China has said it plans to build a lunar scientific research station at the south pole of the moon by 2035.
10年前，美国人禁止中国航天人进入到美国所谓的外太空的这个空间站。那现在呢，中国人有自己的空间站了，而且更重要的是，在航天产业和航天事业上中国这个积极奋进。探索外太空不能仅仅只有美国或者说俄罗斯、欧洲少数几个国家，中国的参与一定是有助于全人类的共同的进步的。
For many years, nations from Russia and China to North Korea and Iran have pursued weapons to jam, blind, and disable our navigation and communication satellites via electronic attacks from the ground. But recently, our adversaries have been working to bring new weapons of war into space itself. In 2015, China created a separate military enterprise to oversee and prioritize its warfighting capabilities in space.
准备完毕，请指示中国人民解放军航天大队航天员魏建龙、航天员郑清明、航天员上路。
Our adversaries have transformed space into a warfighting domain already, and the United States will not shrink from this challenge.
I'll catch the full episode when it airs tonight at 9 p.m. You can also watch it on cn8.asia and on YouTube. Well, that's East Asia Tonight for this Tuesday. Don't forget headlines anytime at cn8.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook and YouTube.